So was that a joke, or you really don't look alike? Or
They don't.
or
They
you're
don't. They are
almost identical where you can't.
They're fraternal. So
We
they're
don't look-
they're not
We
identical.
look like sisters, but not.
We're not twinsies.
No.
So how was the game? Were you at the game yesterday?
Yeah, it was a good game. We won.
Oh,
Yay! No one got hit.
I was about to say, her husband's got season tickets for Astros, and they go a lot. And she got up, was it last week or recently, to get up to go get a drink, and there was a fly ball, and it like what hit the chair where you were sitting in before she got up.
That is so scary. And then the first game we went to, well, first of all, I have to preface it with this. He said, Joe, you're gonna have to pay attention because where we sit at the third baseline, balls come over here. So, you know, you're gonna have to pay attention to the game. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to watch all the people. Here comes a ball, and he's gonna catch it, and then it got lost in the light, and he missed it, and it went up his arm and bruised it, and went like 5 rows up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we went, and Jerry and Joe just sat and talked and pointed at people. And, you know,
Yeah.
we're very no interest in the game too much. But.
I like to people watch too.
Oh my gosh,
It's the
yeah.
best part.
Can I break into the food?
Yeah,
Please
break it,
do.
we're good. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Someone needs it. That's right.
Bring food, they will come.
Yes, that's huge.
Oh, sure.
I'm trying to show people too.
Yeah, of course.
Well, sit in the corner then.
I am over here. Yeah, what am I?
It was, huh?
Yeah, 'cause that's right.
I don't need to tell you that.
I said those chairs are so hard to maneuver, they're so heavy.
Yeah, they are.
If you're up in the air.
You're pretty much planted.
But there's a little
Susie's
thing
down.
you just slide in there.
Do y'all need plates and stuff? Hang on, let me get it.
Where's Maureen?
I know, where's she when we need her?
Things just aren't the same without her.
Mexico.
I know.
No.
I thought she was going to do it yesterday with her grandparents.
Yeah,
They're not going out this evening.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, they're in-laws.
No, he is a
How's she going?
I think she
Maybe she booked after.
Yeah. And so she had to be there.
But you know,
Yours
married to my kid.
But you know, that might be taken from oh, trying to help everybody else, always around everybody. Now she can think about herself.
But what's she gonna do there if she's not speaking Spanish there for a long time? Maybe somebody's gonna pick her up. Okay. I didn't start working it. You forgot to work at it. I said.
Yes, wasn't I ever
Well,
Hi, I'm Ashley. We've met one of our times. I'm good friends with Jamie. You know, share a lot of people.
Oh, I know. That's sure like, that's what we call it.
How did I miss you? Like I just
I know, I was like, is that a trick question?
Okay, just you. Is that all I do? Okay. I just put a cover on. I read it. I read it all on it.
They never.
Wait, that you get sure I put it here. Not here.
actually gone to personal message advice.
I was watching the Astros game yesterday, and parked at the airport. My iPad, I felt the same way, because it was getting really close, my flight was getting ready, so I was walking along with my iPad,
Watch, yeah, I'm trying to watch it.
watching the game.
I'm not sure exactly what they all picked yet. Not those, we're just gonna wait and see what. Yeah, all the traditional ones.
Yeah.
So I think they did, I had to leave on the 8th inning to get on the flight.
Staying in here today? I haven't seen her in a while.
She was coming down and she looked at her calendar and she's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had to
If I have any
get
questions, I'll
ready.
come ask you.
Okay.
Oh, my God. I had to run away furious.
And I'm trying to remember everything.
I'm gonna take some good notes, I think, because there's a lot of people who can't be here that want it to be.
It kind of varies, it
So
just kind
hopefully
of comes
between
off
the
the
two of
top of my
us, we can
head.
get something good to take
Usually
away
the
from it.
questions kind of steer us to where we want to go. I figured they want to know about map changes. We'll talk about how to figure out whether the house is flooded before or not. I'll make it a little bit dangerous on how to determine flood zone for them with just a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah?
Real estate.
Seriously, good staff.
Hey.
Trying to get too deep in the weeds with the insurance side of it. because
Yeah.
It's not their.
Yeah,
not their
yeah.
bag.
I said hello to you, but I said.
Yeah, we're not gonna reveal our secrets, where we keep all of our kids.
No, I said.
No, like, you probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last one I just did. Last week, what about that last week? I was down in Dickinson, I
You
guess.
are.
Last week. Last week. Yeah. We had almost 50 people.
Finally figured it out.
But they're getting ready to go to the Galveston map change.
Alright. So you're on there, like, right in the walkway.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. They've left that.
I mean, a good crowd. I love a good crowd. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just so big now, so I just try to do an average, you know, and so anything they ask.
Yeah, well,
Okay, so I'll go ahead and introduce you guys. While everybody's finishing up and getting their food. Thank y'all for coming in today. We have brought in some special guests, and we're going to talk about some flood maps and flood zones and all that stuff regarding flood, which, as you guys know, is very relevant to our area. So this is Lum Edwards. This is John Reichert.
it is.
So John's going to speak to you guys today, and I guess if any questions they have, we can just hit you with them. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So thank you guys.
Real quick, I also want to, we're with J.S. Edwards and Sherlock Insurance Agency, and also in back there's Tanya Westfall. And after, if something happens after you guys, the meeting's over, John's left, you got a question or something that you didn't think to ask, don't hesitate to give me a call, give Tanya a call. We're an independent agent, and we represent a lot of different companies. We're not just tied to one. And many of the carriers that we represent still write windstorm with the homeowners policy. So if you guys have any needs or need some assistance or just questions, don't hesitate to give us a holler. And with that, I'll turn it over to John, the guy who knows more about flood insurance than anybody things to ask. So.
I'll try to live up to that billing. This is kind of interesting with the poll, so I'll try to weave this way for a while and go that way for a while to keep everybody in view. My name is John Reichert. I work with Wright Flood Insurance. We're the largest writer of flood in the NFIP industry. I've been doing this for 20 years, so I know a little bit about the program. Okay? So this morning, I'm just going to try to give you what I think is the real estate side of my business. Forgive me, I work with a lot of insurance agents, been working with J.S. Edwards and Sherlock for my 20-year career. But I'm not going to try to bore you with the insurance side, just try to keep up with some things for you from the real estate side, and it is wide open. So you got a question, shoot it, okay? I don't really have an agenda. I kind of talk off the top of my head as far as what I think you might want to know, but I want you to walk out of here with all your questions answered if you can do so, all right? So the very first thing that I normally get is John, how do I know if a house has ever flooded before if I'm listing or I'm trying to buy? And the answer is I hope that you're not using Clue to find that out, because flood does not report to Clue. And I hope that you knew that already, but if you didn't, new information for you, all right? So there is no national database where you can go and find out whether the house is flooded or not. The best I can do for you is this. If the registered owner of the home currently wants what's called a loss run history, you want to write that down because that's what you're going to request. A loss, L-O-S-S, run, R-U-N, history, they can do so by calling the NFIP direct. And I'm about to give you that phone number. Okay, so you can call the NFIP direct at 1-800-427-4661. Now, if you are expecting a nice 17-page glossy report that tells you everything that's ever happened, that ain't what you're gonna get, okay? How many of you are old enough to remember dot matrix printers? Where you had to have the peel of the paper off the side? You're gonna get something that looks pretty close to that, okay? And all it's gonna tell you is that on this date, that address suffered a loss and it was paid X amount of dollars. It doesn't break it down how it was done or et cetera. The issue that you in real estate have is that it had to have had a policy, right, to have a loss. So if it didn't have a policy, there's going to be no record anywhere that I know of that the house had water in it. So you're going to be at the mercy of your endeavor to discuss with the client, either listing or buying, has this ever had water in it. The next thing to remember is that in the flood insurance program, the loss stays with the structure. It does not follow the insured. The loss stays with the structure. So if that home has had multiple losses with a flood policy and your client buys it and they suffer a loss, they decide to have flood insurance and they suffer a loss, they carry all the losses previously with them going forward. So be aware of that, because it can make a big difference in the premium that they're charged for their flood insurance. Okay? Any questions about trying to determine what houses have water in it before? It's the best I can do for you. NFIP Direct, I'll give you the phone number one more time, 800-427-4661. Now, I forgot to give you my disclaimer when I normally do these, so I need to go back just a second, okay? So what I'm about to tell you this morning is everything that I know about the flood program today. But by the time we all get in our cars in the parking lot when I'm done, the federal government may have changed everything that I just told you, and I unintentionally lied to you. Okay, everybody nod your head that you understand? Okay, all right. Because I don't even know if that phone number still works. It worked last week. Okay? But it is FEMA and the federal government, and they do use vendors. So I just looked down and went, I didn't call that number today to see whether it's still a working number. Okay, any questions about that? It's really difficult. You're basically at the mercy, folks, of the person who owns the home. And if they're going to decide, what's the disclosure? Yeah, the disclosure form, you might want to make sure you ask the questions, because there's no really way to track that. And we have had some water in houses in this area. All right. So, all right. The next thing that normally comes up is, John, how in the world can I determine a flood zone? Well, that's a little more difficult. However, with two questions, I'm going to try to make you a little dangerous this morning. Okay. So with two questions, I think you can get about 85 to 90% accurate on a flood zone determination without asking anybody else except the people that own the home. You ready? Everybody's going, this is no way. Okay, so the first question is do you have a mortgage on the structure, and is it a federally backed lender? In other words, not a for sale by owner, not that I borrowed money from Uncle Jim. Do I have a federally backed lender? If they do, then the next question to be asked is, when you closed your loan, were you forced to buy flood insurance? Okay, so do you have a federally backed loan? When you closed, were you forced to buy flood insurance? Those people are in the 100-year floodplain. All right, so the vernacular out here on the street is nobody wants to be in the 100-year floodplain. In my side of the world and on the insurance world, we don't use 100-year floodplain. We use A zone. A is an apple. So if you are talking to a lender or to an individual and they are talking about an A zone, A is an apple, that's what we all talk about as the 100-year floodplain. Okay? But with those two questions, do you have a federally backed mortgage? When you closed, were you forced to buy flood insurance? If the answer is yes, they're inside the 100-year floodplain. If the answer to the second question is no, they were not inside the 100-year floodplain. And the mortgage company keeps track of all current map changes. So if there was a map change, they would have gotten a letter that told them that they had to have flood insurance. So again, you're not going to be 100% accurate, but you're going to be fairly close as to whether or not that particular structure is in the 100-year floodplain. The mortgage industry polices that. They get fined $3,000 per occurrence, no limit, if they are caught with a loan in the 100-year floodplain without flood coverage. So trust me, they monitor it very, very closely. So you can use those two questions to get pretty dang close. The next thing, though, that I want to tell you, even though you don't sell insurance, is your client says, I don't want to see a house that might flood. I want you to show me only houses that haven't flooded. And I need you to teach them the word yet. I need to see a house that hasn't flooded yet. Because, right, you've lived here long enough to know that we can't guarantee them that the house will never flood at all after Harvey and other things. I just came back, I was just telling them, I was in Brownsville yesterday, where a month ago, they got 13 inches of rain in 6 hours. There was a measurement of 9 inches of rain in an hour and a half. Well, there are a lot of people down there that got water in their houses. I only had 212 claims, which tells me one thing, which is pretty across the board. People don't buy flood insurance, so they don't think it'll ever happen to them, right? But after Hurricane Harvey, oh, and by the way, next week I'm going to Arkansas where I've got flooding because the Arkansas River flooded because of something that happened north of them. They didn't even get the rain, okay? So it is a situation where, yes, it's my business, and yes, I sell flood insurance, but just trying to be a good corporate citizen, and that is for everybody in this area. If Harvey didn't teach us what it looks like when we get a heavy rainstorm, then we weren't paying any attention because, and it all depends on where the water falls. Humble, Texas got hit just like you folks did from Harvey. About 3 months ago, they got a really freak storm. On YouTube, they got kids standing up on the second floor balcony in a new high school filming the maintenance guy walking along the bottom with about 2 feet of water, or the water coming in the front of their brand new school. So I have an agent over there who, just about every flood policy that he had a claim during Harvey. So I called him and I said, here we go again, huh? And he said, believe it or not, we have some claims, but get this. Not a single person who got wet in this freak little storm got wet during Harvey. Not a single one, okay? So he had 200-something claims from Harvey. He had about 17 from this little storm, and they didn't cross over. So nobody got wet from Harvey. All of them that got wet were not from Harvey. So it just depends on where the water falls as to what happens to your location. So when the clients say, show me something that hasn't flooded yet, is that what you're looking to see? Okay? All right, any questions about flood zones at all? How many of you work or sell down by the beach? Got a few hands up, okay. Let's talk real quick then about the difference between A as in apple and V as in Victor, okay? A as in apple is 100-year floodplain inland, where the Army Corps of Engineers assumes that the water is going to get to a certain level if we have a rainfall similar to the most heavy event in the last 100 years. That's where the 100-year floodplain comes from, okay? They try to water model what's the largest rainfall that we've had in a 24-hour period in the last 100 years. That's what they use to determine the 100-year floodplain. All right, V zone, V as in Victor. If you like the word velocity, that's what it means. The water has to have wave or tidal action to be in a V zone. So that's the reason on the peninsula, you've got on the front part where the wave action, that's V. On the back side, which is bay, you have A, because the water does come up and down in the bay, but not have the velocity like it does on the front.
But aren't there some properties that are like close to the road that are still on the beach side that are A?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And that's one of the things to remember about a flood zone. And that is that it is an imaginary line that's been drawn on the ground. And so it can snake through the neighborhood. So you can have a house on that side of the street that's in a V zone and somebody on this side of the street that's an A zone. Okay? V zone velocity, it also stands for very expensive. Okay? So when your client says, I want a beach house, please prep them for the fact that it is very expensive to insure them. It ought to be. They're on the beach that's as flat as this table, and if we get a 17 to 20 foot storm surge, typically that house is rebuildable because it's not there anymore. Okay, it goes away. So V zone on the beach, A zone 100-year floodplain, B as in boy, C as in cat, X as in X-ray. Those are all the low to moderate flooding areas that are outside the 100-year floodplain, where we are not required to carry flood. But I can tell you for a fact that every time we have a major storm or a minor storm here in Texas, half of the structures that get wet are outside the 100-year floodplain. I'll say that again. Half of the structures that get wet are outside the 100-year floodplain. Okay? Tropical Storm Barry that just went into Louisiana claims now runs what they call the Riker report, because I've said that for many years because I'm here in Texas, and they started going, I don't think that's exactly right, John. And I said, well, I'm just talking about my territory. I don't know about everybody else's. Tropical Storm Barry, our claims, 49.7% BC or X zone, okay? The problem that you have with doing the claims is most people get wet, they don't have a policy. So claims can't quite hit that number. I'm just telling you that they get wet, all right? Most of those people don't have any insurance, and those sometimes are the houses that you resell because an investor purchased it from them off the scrap heap, or it went back to the bank till they file bankruptcy. Don't let that be you or your clients, okay? All right, flood zones, flood zone determinations. Map changes. How many of you work in the Galveston County area? Ooh, not much. Okay.
Not probably from this office, but our Mont Bellevue office has agents who work a lot in that area.
All right. So let's.
Crystal Beach. Crystal Beach is Galveston County.
All right. So Galveston's map is changing. Their flood map changes 8/15 of this year. So August the 15th. So it is possible that if you get down on Crystal Beach, that you're going to run into a map change next month. Also remember that we have map changes that are still pending for Jefferson and for Orange. They were announced in 2012.
The changes, the upcoming changes were announced in 2012?
Yes, ma'am. They are not adopted yet. Which is also the answer to the question of John. Do you think we're going to get map changes from Hurricane Harvey? Yes. But it might be your grandkids that have to worry about them. Okay? That's about the speed of the federal government. Yeah. The map changes Galveston is from Hurricane Ike.
Okay, so that August 15th date was probably.
2008. The data that we used for this map is from Ike 2008. Okay? But yes, it is changing 8/15. We have all kinds of things going on. So before I spend all your time discussing that piece of the puzzle, without you working that area very often, if you got a question, call Tanya or Plum, okay? But we got base flood going up, base flood going down. We got A zones going to V, V to A, and the rules for the flood program are different for each zone. So sometimes down on the island, we get what I call neighboritis. You know what neighboritis is?
Nervousness.
Well, it's, I was talking to my neighbor, and they pay a different flood premium than I do. So I think my insurance guy is not going to have you put the word in there, whatever it is, when it's not. It's because your neighbor is 2 houses down in a completely different flood zone, completely different structure, and for flood, it makes a world of difference. Okay, it could be just 2 doors down. It might be just depending on the date that it was built, okay? So don't let neighboritis get you as a real estate agent when the person say, you know what, I think something's wrong with this house. I think 2 houses down, they get a better rate. They may, or they may not, and it may be only because of the structure, okay? But yeah, maps are changing. The big one around here for you is going to be Bridge C. That has been the fight. That's the reason that we haven't gotten it adopted yet. And it also is the reason it takes so long, because the federal government spends the money to do the map, but then it is a two-sided street. So the local authorities must agree and adopt the map, and FEMA normally doesn't force them to. They apply some pressure. You didn't hear that from me, but after a while, FEMA says, you know what? The next time you have a storm, we may not be as willing to offer you as much money as we used to unless you get these maps in place that we spent all this money on and they're set down here for 7 years. I think that's kind of what happened to Galveston, because Galveston kept saying, fix this, fix that, do this, do that. And finally, after a while, FEMA narrowed it down to, we need to get this implemented. I think it's going to happen in Jefferson and Orange here fairly shortly. But I kind of had that feeling the first of the year, and now it's kind of gone away because it's July and we still don't have your maps done. Here's the best thing to tell your client. Do not worry so much about a map change. The way I would fix it, and I know you're going to say, well, you're a flood guy, but I'm just trying to be a good corporate citizen. If you buy a flood policy before any map changes, the program typically will help you find the best premium available to you after the map change. What I mean by that is that if you buy if you buy a policy before the map changes, then we have programs that are what's called continuous coverage grandfathering. So you get to keep the zone that you had before the map changed. So if you were outside the 100-year floodplain and they draw you into the 100-year floodplain, you're going to have to buy a policy if you still have a mortgage, but we're going to be able to sell you one that's less expensive, and you're not going to have to go get an elevation certificate if you have the policy. If you wait and it goes past a year, then all bets are off. That house will have to have an elevation certificate to be rated for flood insurance, okay? Which brings me to my next point. Elevation certificates. How many of you in here love them? Oh, you do? I got caught you on that.
I had to do it myself.
All right. How many of you know when you have to have one? Okay, so let me give you the rules for elevation certificates and when you're going to need one so that your antenna can go up and you don't find 2 hours before closing, right? So here we go. If you are in the 100-year floodplain, A zone, okay? A is in apple. And any letter or number thereafter, because we got AE, AO, A12, A17, you name it. Anything starting with an A, 100-year floodplain. You will need an elevation certificate if that structure was built after December the 31st, 1974. I'll give you the date again. If your structure was built after December the 31st, 1974, you will need an elevation certificate to get a rate. Or, government program, you knew there was an or, right? Or the date that the community came into the program. And that's the confusing piece, so write it down and I'll explain it. Okay, so you're going to need an elevation certificate if your house was built after December the 31st, 1974, or the date the community came into the program. So, for example, Abilene, Texas, 74, but the county around Abilene didn't come into the program until 2010. So you could have a house that was built in 2009 in Abilene be what's called pre-firm. They did not have access to the flood program. Here in your area, almost every date is 1974. I can't think of any place that's not. But it is possible that if you're selling real estate just outside of here, you may run into a community that didn't come into the program until at a later date. If you have questions about that, I can give you a website, okay? If you will Google 3 words, community status, STATUS, book, BOOK. The very first thing that comes up is the NFIP floods community status book. It's going to give you all 50 states. You're going to click Texas, and it is going to open for you every single community that participates in the flood program here in the state of Texas in alphabetical order. The third line in, it will tell you the firm date, FIRM, Federal Insurance Rate Map. It says INT. This was the initial FIRM. In that column, it will tell you every community and the date that it came into the program. Why does that matter? Well, if you were selling real estate on the north end of Lake Livingston, that community does not participate in the flood program. North part of the lake cannot get flooded. Not available. Never has gotten themselves into the program. If they ever did, their date for coming into the program would be 2019, 2020, whenever they come in, which I don't know if they ever will or not. Have some issues up there with government management. Okay, so let me give you a trick on how to close a property at closing without an elevation certificate if it was built before 1974. All right, so before December the 31st, 1974, you can go to closing without an elevation certificate on something called pre-firm policy. Pre, B-R-E, dash, F-I-R-M. Not that the ground is solid, all right? FIRM is an acronym for Federal Insurance Rate Map, okay? You can close on a pre-firm. You do not have to have an elevation certificate, okay? You call these folks up, say, I have a house built in 1970. I need a policy. We're at closing. Somebody didn't alert us, whatever, okay? They will write you a pre-firm policy without an elevation certificate. However, it is a secondary home. FEMA is raising that premium 25% a year, every year. So it is a trick to get you to closing, to either save the property, to keep your loan points, however you're doing it. But then you want to tell the client to get an elevation certificate and re-rate themselves to see if we can stop that premium increase, okay? It's just a trick to get you guys through closing. Any questions about that? Where do you get an elevation certificate? Ah, the age-old question. All right, so let's talk. An elevation certificate, I'm probably going to give you way too much information. You're going to walk out here and say, I do not care, that man is nuts. But I want to give you at least a little info so that you can kind of follow the paper trail, so it kind of makes it a little bit easier to understand what this darn thing is that nobody can find, okay? So if I am a builder and I am going to build at 123 Smith Street and it is inside the 100-year floodplain, the community rules with the federal government are that any new construction inside the 100-year floodplain or on the beach must be above the established base flood. So I, as a builder, must certify my elevation to be above base flood. Therefore, I get an elevation certificate. I take that to the building permit office. I'm going to build a house at 123 Smith Street. Oh, that's in the 100-year floodplain. I know. Here's my elevation certificate certifying that I'm building above base flood. Yes, it is. Here's your building permit. The elevation certificate should have been the very first legal document done on the structure if it was built inside the 100-year floodplain or on the beach. So the builder should have a copy. This is the first doc that they did on that particular home, okay? So start with the builder. The second one is the building permit office. They're supposed to keep them up to 10 years. Right. Okay, some counties do a very good job, some do not. If you went to Harris County, as I have before, the young lady behind the counter looks at you and goes, "You for real? I don't have that document, never will. We get rid of those things every 2 months." I wanted to go, "You're not supposed to," but I didn't, okay? I've also been to other counties where the young lady said, "What year are you looking for?" And she went in the back and I heard, big old file drawer come out. About 5 minutes later, she goes, "I found it." So ask the building permit office to see if they have an elevation certificate. The next thing is you as a realtor, okay? Find out who may have transacted that building before. Were they in the same spot that you are now? Can't find an elevation certificate, so ask around. You as a realtor, if you get one, it is gold. Keep a copy, because you never know if that house might come up for sale again and you represent the buyer or the seller. Then you'll have this magical document that nobody else has, okay? If you have to get a new one, where do you go? A local surveyor. You do not need to go to an engineering firm. The house is already built, okay? No need to engineer anything. Local surveyor. It is just like shopping for a new dress, ladies, and that is you're going to look at different websites, you're going to go to different places because you're looking for the best price. It's the exact same thing for surveyors doing an elevation certificate. Have your client or you pick up the phone, call the local surveyor. "I need an elevation certificate done at 123 Smith Street," and see what rate they give you. It will vary depending on what parts of town they have worked before. Okay? Trust me, I used to be in land development. So shop around. Don't need an engineer, just a local surveyor. The next thing, when do elevation certificates expire? They do not. As long as the elevation certificate was done before 1982, that certificate is good for the life of the building, as long as you do not make changes to the structure. Now, I had a porch and I screened it in. That's not changing the structure. I added on 2 bedrooms and a game room in the back. That's changing the structure. Everybody following? So as long as the footprint stays the same, I used to have 2 bedrooms, now I only have 1. Now that doesn't matter. But I enlarged it, I blew out the back, I did something different. Then I'm going to need a new elevation certificate for that structure. But as long as the elevation certificate and the structure match, they were done and nothing's changed, the certificate is good forever. I've had people say, "John, when I look at my elevation certificate, up here on the right-hand corner, there's a date, it says it expires," okay? The form expires. Once the form is filled out, it's okay. As long as the date at the bottom that the surveyor signs and dates to make it a legal document is done before the expiration date. However, we have a small caveat. Currently, our elevation certificate form expired November of 2018. FEMA has yet to come up with a new one. So the magical government pixie dust has said, this one currently is still good until we can get our act together. So you went to the class, the guy told me, now the date doesn't match, what's wrong? We are accepting the old form until we get a new one, then we will go back to the old rule. Federal government at its best, okay? So, but if you get an older certificate, it still should be good, as long as no changes have been made to the field, okay? Any questions about elevation certificates? Yes, ma'am.
So if you're not in a flood zone now, and you get a flood policy, and then you get changed on the map into one, and you don't need the elevation certificate, and then you sell your house, is your buyer grandfathered also, or are they gonna need the elevation?
That's a great question. Yes. So, flood policies are transferable to a new owner, okay? In the flood program, on a blank sheet of paper, I have a form on my website, but you can do it on the back of an Eskimo pie wrapper if you want to. All it has to say is that I, John Smith, sold my house to John Doe on this date, and I want to transfer my flood policy. I need that document signed by all people listed on the current flood deck and all people buying the structure, dated, and a copy of a settlement statement that shows that the legal transaction took place between those two individuals on that date, and I automatically transfer the flood policy and all the grandfathered goodies that go with it. If they go to get a new policy, they can grandfather themselves on a different side of the coin. So I talked about continuous coverage, which is the easiest one. I got a policy, it walks through the map change, it just keeps going. I can grandfather to a map, all right, after the fact, but it must be the map that was in effect at the time that the house was built, not just to the current map that just changed. So if my house was built in 1981, I have to find the flood map that was in effect at the time that the house was built in 1981, and I must be compliant to the map. I cannot be built below base flood. Okay, so we got those two rules. Then the next piece is that I can only grandfather two things off of that map. I can grandfather a base flood, and I can grandfather a zone. I do not automatically grandfather structures, okay? So if you're a real estate person and you like to tell the folks, don't worry about that beach house, it's grandfathered, I would hope that you change the way you use the word grandfathered, okay? I can grandfather a base flood, I can grandfather a zone, but if they have done something to that structure and put an enclosure underneath it since it was built, that's not grandfatherable. I'm not sure that's a word, I just kind of made it up and used it. But I can't grandfather that enclosure. I can give them the base flood that was out there, I can give them the zone that was out there, but if they change the structure, that's not a grandfathering issue. I am going to rate for that. So, two forms of grandfathering. Did that answer your question? Transfer if you can. Now, there are 82 flood companies that do what my company does. Most of us will be more than willing to help you with the transfer paperwork. In fact, Right Fund will do it all. I just need those two pieces of paper. But I just heard a couple of weeks ago that two of my competitors no longer are wanting to help you with the transfer paperwork. That's kind of a bite, because transferring policies right now in this area is very important to us. Transfer if you can, because generally that policy is going to keep a better possibility of a premium than the one going forward. Great question, though. Any other questions about elevation certificate?
Can you talk about, like at the beach, how if you add like an elevator or if you put a structure underneath it, how that affects things?
Can I draw on this board?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going to be able to tell real quick that I'm not an artist. Okay. Somebody's got a house full of money. I'd like to know those people. Okay. You're going to, as I said, you're going to tell real quick, I'm not an artist. Typical beach house in Galveston, right? You've seen them all built on post piers and pilings. I need you to understand that it's not that we like the architectural style. It's because the base flood is not on the beach. So I'm going to now move all of us underneath the beach house. Everybody with me? So there's where we live. Down here's our enclosure. The sand's outside the door. Everybody following? Okay. The reason that we put this thing on post piers and pilings is to elevate the structure, because right here in Galveston, the sand is 8 feet and my base flood is 14 feet, typically. Anywhere from 11 to 15 right now. All right. So I can't get a building permit if I put it slab on grade. I got to elevate it and get it above this number, which is why my floor is up here. Looks like that, elevated on post piers and pilings. As long as you do it this way and you're above the base flood, people are shocked to find their flood premiums. They just go, there's no way, that's like $600. Yeah. And the reason is because if you have seen the boardwalk or any type of other structure near Galveston, where the water comes underneath it and goes back and forth, and it's done that way for years, and the structure above it is fine. That's the reason for the lower risk. It's made for when the water comes underneath on a storm surge, that it goes underneath this structure and it goes back out to the ocean, and nothing happens to this structure. After Ike, if you saw the picture of that one lone white house sitting on Crystal Beach, it is because that gentleman built 3 foot higher than his neighbors, took a bunch of grief for it, and he put no enclosure under it. So the water went underneath and came back all night long. It scoured the bottom of part of his decking, but other than that, he had no damage. Everybody else, as you well know, was wiped clean, okay? That's because here in Texas, we can't have it that way. Here in Texas, man, look at all this space. I could put a man cave, a kitchen, grandmother's quarters, place for a wine bar, what else am I missing, ladies? Okay, so here we go. So we end up where it looks like this. Big garage door in here, got windows, all kinds of things, okay? So what happens to the owner is this. We just went from rating you for the flood policy up here, 2 feet above base flood, to now we're rating you from the floor because you added an enclosure underneath your structure. This was your base flood, you're now 6 feet below. So your 800 policy just went to about 6,000. Okay? And here in Texas, everybody goes, yeah, the flood policy is killing me. No, your enclosures are killing me, okay? Because it's a hassle to rate this thing, all right? Because I got all these rules and regs about how do I do this enclosure. And then we get neighboritis because I've got rules for A zone and I've got rules for B zone. So what happens in the Galveston area is that you hire a builder and he says, oh, don't worry about it. Last week, I just finished the house down the street. We put all this enclosure in and all that, no problem. And they did because it's in an A zone. And as long as he vented it properly and all this was a garage, I don't rate for it in an A zone. But your property is just down the block, it's in a B zone. But he don't check it for you because he wants your money. So you say, sure, build that thing for me. So he builds it, you accept it, then you show up at these folks' office, want insurance, and they say, wow, you're in a B zone, you got this full enclosure, it's gonna be about $9,000. And you say, wait, I talked to my neighbor, right? So yeah, and your neighbor got a totally different situation. Lum asked about elevators. Here's my simplest thing for an elevator. It's gonna cost you a lot of money, okay? When you put an elevator on any structure for the flood program, it's going to cost you a lot of money because there's no way I can stop the water from turning that elevator into some sort of destructive device. Here's what happens, okay? So if we are underneath the beach house, okay, everybody understand where we are? So what happens is in an A zone, if you like the word accumulate, the water starts building up on the outside of this structure during a storm surge. And the higher it gets, it becomes the weight of an elephant. Trust me, it's heavy. And eventually, if we don't put holes in the wall, it will collapse this whole wall. And when it does, then this part falls in the water, and then the water goes underneath it, and it tips over, and then it turns into fish food. Everybody following? So in an A zone, I allow you to put vents. They're just holes in the wall, lets the water come through, and it equalizes the pressure. So the only thing that happens is this gets wet. I don't lose the whole structure. Everybody following? So if you put vents in the holes in the wall and all I do is park my car, my boat, my motorcycle, my trail, whatever I got down here, I can eliminate this enclosure in an A zone because I dealt with the accumulation of water. But when I'm in a V zone, V as in Victor, the water has velocity. So now I'm not worried about it accumulating. I'm worried about it making impact. So what I rate from is the lowest horizontal structural member. whatever it is right here that's holding up that floor, because this is the first place where the water's gonna make, boom, an impact. But when you put an elevator shaft in the middle of this beach house, and we're gonna use this one, it'd be a real slim elevator, a guy like me would fit there. But this is my elevator shaft. When the water hits this, I have seen it tear a 20 to 30 foot hole in the whole floor of this thing, because the water pounds on this thing all night long. And it just starts breaking and destroying, and eventually then the water splashes and it gets up and we end up with a total loss. So you put an elevator in a beach house, your risk for total loss goes way up, and so does your premium. Okay? Now, I completely understand. Nobody likes to walk the stairs. And if you can afford a beach house, put yourself in elevator. But don't complain about the flood premium, okay? Because now you understand why it is such a risk to the structure. The next thing is that we get a big barge or a boat floating through, and it makes contact here, and it keeps pushing. Eventually, it'll take this whole structure with it. In my 20 years, I've made 14 storms. I've seen a few things. So, God, farmers, you know, we've seen it all. Well, I haven't seen a lot of stuff, okay? Boats sitting on I-10, all kind of things like that. So water can do some really destructive things. But you put a elevator in a beach house, your premium is going to go through the roof. I got no way to not rate for it. If you sell these beach houses, you just got to explain to the people that because of this enclosure, there are rules and regulations. And here in the state of Texas, we just don't like to abide by them. And I understand, but it's going to cost you an extra $1 on your flood premium. Question?
What about those elevators that are like that metal mesh kind of
A
stuff?
lift.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's called a lift.
That's on the outside.
You're not supposed to ride in them, but everybody does, okay? You're supposed to put your groceries in it and then turn it on, then go up the stairs, and then it's supposed to lift your groceries to the top. Yeah, right. And everybody goes, no, grandma rides on that thing.
What are the?
I know.
Yeah. So what
Not supposed to. All right, so here's what FEMA says you should do with your lift. All right, so here in Texas, again, not only do we have a beach house, but man, we got a deck that's bigger than most houses back on the East Coast, right? I mean, we got 4,000 square foot of decking out there. And then we put our lift on the other side of the deck, usually. So it comes up, we walk across the deck into the beach house. FEMA says that if you attach that lift to your deck, and then here's grandma's lift going up like this, right? If you attach it, we rate for it, okay? Here's the way FEMA wants it to look, kind of like this. FEMA wants it to be inside of its own enclosure, okay? So that it is not attached to the structure, which is, the deck is part of your structure. So you need to get one that has the safety feature of a wheelchair where you flip the little switch and the plate comes down so you can step across, because they literally want you to keep 4 inches of distance between the lift and the deck. If you do that, we don't rate the lift with the house. We have to carry a policy on the lift, but you can put $5,000 on this thing to cover that, and then it's, you know, $400 or whatever.
So you do have to have flood.
You're supposed,
So you can't write the house flood and then not write the lift.
you're supposed to.
But if it's 4 inches separated and it's on its own structure, you don't technically have to have it?
You're supposed to have a policy on that lift. If you put it next to the structure, you're supposed to have a policy. FEMA says that's the way for you not to have to pay the full rate for the home, because I'd have to rate the house with the lift outside on the deck. So put it on its own thing, put a policy on it, but you don't have to insure it for anything because you're not really going to probably collect anything. So put a premium on it. It's going to be fairly high, but it's only $200, $300, and save the premium not on your home. But if you're going to put an enclosure down here with anything else on it, you're going to have a high premium anyway. But we get.
Wait, what? You mean the deck?
No, the lift.
Okay.
What happens to us is that, and I hate to say this, anybody in here, husband or significant other, a builder?
A beach cabin specifically.
Yes.
Do you step outside?
I need to hear this. We don't put that.
I appreciate it. What happens is that the pressure from the general public forces the builders and the suppliers to come up with a way around the rules. It's just what happens. So I've been doing it for 20 years. We have this rule, next thing you know, somebody's going, hey, John, they got louvered walls down in Galveston. They're not really solid. They're not like a wall at all. In fact, they're not even an enclosure. In fact, you don't even have to rate for it. No, that's not anywhere in the flood program that I've ever seen, okay? So finally, we got FEMA to come down and take a look at our louvered walls. And FEMA finally said, you know what, we'll give them credit for certain parts of it. So we kind of came to some sort of agreement after 6 years, right? So then all of a sudden, we started putting elevators in the houses, the full-blown elevator. Everybody was like, man, that's gonna cost me a fortune. So all of a sudden, this part of Texas, it ain't an elevator, it's a lift. Right, does it go from one floor to the next? Yeah, but it's not an elevator, it's a lift. Okay, we're gonna put it underneath the house? Yes, no, can't do that. So then it became, oh, not a problem. Our lift goes on the outside by the deck. Yeah, but it's still attached to the structure. So FEMA finally said, yeah, they can do a lift, but you just can't attach it. So you literally have to see air up there. You have to see the light between the lift and where you step over, okay? They make one, like I said, where you flip the switch and the little panel comes down. It's made for people in wheelchairs. Or you can get what's called a kick plate, either rubber one or metal. And when it comes up, you just slide it over and everybody steps across if you're concerned about tiny feet or ankles getting stuck in this little hole. But that's the only way FEMA allows us to break the rating if you put a lift in your beach house.
Things like that would create more liability. Not so much flood liability, but injury.
Yeah. So FEMA doesn't care about.
Yeah.
They don't get injury claims.
From a flood standpoint, they want that lift to tear away and float away. That way it doesn't do damage to the structure. That's the reason it's not attached. But yeah, I completely understand. I had a guy in Rockport that bought a house, and the people that owned the house had paid cash for it, so we didn't have a lender policing anything, right? So he buys it with cash and then decides that, you know what, I put too much cash in this, so he tried to get a loan to get some of his equity out. So it turns out that the people had built a really nice deck and went down to a gazebo and all this sitting area and all that. But when you attach that down there in an A zone to the house here, all of it becomes A zone, and his flood premium is going to be astronomical. So we told him that because the deck is attached to the house is the reason we have to rate for it. And he literally said, if I take a chainsaw to it, will it not be connected? And I said, technically you're correct. And that's what he did. We got a picture. He took a chainsaw and he cut 2 inches out of the whole deck so that you just stepped across. And I took it to FEMA and they said, technically it's not attached. So we removed his house from his really nice deck, but he did it with a chainsaw. Whatever works, right? We're in Texas. So any other questions about elevated structures, post piers, and pilings with an enclosure?
Okay, say you have the raised beach house and then just like the one garage. And if that's in flood zone A, it's a listing I have right now. And so the one is okay though, correct?
I love what people say. It's not really an enclosure. It's just a place where we park the car. All right. So I'm going to give you John Reicher's way to determine whether you have an enclosure or not. All right. Okay. So if you are underneath the beach house, can you turn 360 degrees and see the outside world? No, that's an enclosure. I don't care whether it's a shower or a boat hiding place, whatever we call it. In the A zone, though, you're okay as long as we have vents in the walls, okay? A vent is nothing more than a hole in the wall. We got fancy covers that go on them, but it is literally a hole in the wall, lets the water go back and forth, okay?
go back and forth too. through those holes.
Just have to have vents, okay? As long as it's used for parking, storage, building access, we're okay, in an A zone.
Okay.
In an A zone, we don't rate anymore because it's vented properly. We have a non-obstructed rate. We go to the next highest floor for rating purposes. You put a bathroom down here, living area, I rate from the floor. You put air conditioning down here, I rate from the floor. Anything that looks to FEMA like it could possibly be turned into living area, I rate from down here. Parking, storage, building access. Staircase that goes up so I can get out of the rain, park a boat or car in here, or I put a pool table down here because I'm storing my pool table underneath my beach house. But that, we allow for that. But you start putting finishes down here and people start congregating here and we end up with some sort of air conditioning, FEMA says it's living space and they're gonna want us to rate from the bottom.
You did mention bathrooms or showers. So if you have an outdoor shower that, you know, the wall doesn't touch the ceiling and it doesn't touch the ground, those would be vents?
Okay, so outdoor showers that have privacy screening, okay, are fine as long as they are what I call ring pull showers. So you have the plumbing comes out of the floor above you and it's on a ring or a pull. So you walk in, you close the door, you pull the ring, the water comes down onto you so you can wash the sand off. I don't rate for those.
If it turns.
But if you're turning the knobs and I have a drain in the floor, I may have an issue with that because here's why. We start off with just the little slats like privacy, and then the next thing you know, somebody has put up the sheetrock and we've turned this into a bathroom. And so what FEMA says is that if you put drains and everything in there, it could possibly be turned into, and I'm gonna rate from the bottom. But if the plumbing comes down out of the ceiling or the floor actually above you, and you have knobs like this, you're okay. As long as I tell people, as long as the water supply is going up and it's not coming from the floor to you, you should be okay.
What if there's a half bath? Not a full one.
I don't have an enclosure. It's just where grandma lives when she comes. Any bathroom.
The toilet, plumbing's in
And
the
here-
ground.
Yeah, here's your next issue, unfortunately, for what I do. This is a government program. So FEMA holds the right to re-underwrite at the time of loss. So what we deal with, and I hate to throw it on the general public, but typically what happens is somebody creates a house, they build a new one, it's on post piers and pilings, there's nothing underneath it. They go to the insurance folks, they get a policy, free and clear, nothing underneath, very cheap. Then, as soon as the paper and the ink is dry, they go down and finish it, and then because they just get an automatic renewal from the federal government. So FEMA holds the right to re-underwrite at the time of loss. So what happens to you is that you put an enclosure after the fact, you get coverage, but what happens is we re-rate your policy after the loss and take the money that you gave us and buy you the level of coverage that it will buy at the new rate. Well, $600 buys you 10 grand. So what happens is then you as a homeowner have to pay the additional premium to get the policy back up to the place where it is before we've settled your loss. So a lot of people try their best to figure out a way to get around it. And I always tell them, you can do that for a while, but as soon as the water comes through, we're gonna catch you because we have all the underwriting file from the time that it was sent to us. And the adjuster goes, this don't even look like the same house. And it's probably not.
Could you just switch gears real
Sure.
quick and talk about the difference between a floodplain and a floodway?
Yeah. All right, let's start with a floodway. We don't have a zone for floodway, but a floodway is basically, in my opinion, it's when over in Louisiana, they build inside the levees.
By your book. In front of you.
So over in Louisiana, we have the Mississippi River, and then we have levees where when this river gets out, it's supposed to stay inside the floodway. And then people come in here and they build houses. And then you just go, I didn't think I'd ever flood. Really? Well, there's the river, and there's what keeps the river from getting anybody else, and you built between them. Okay? Now, typically a floodway is in an A zone. I don't rate for floodway. I just know that the water probably is going to get there. So there is no rate for floodway. But when you're in a floodway, you basically are in an area that's been designated as where the water is going to go.
We have those here.
Yes. A flood zone is the determination of where we think the water is going to get by giving it base flood. So let me give you an idea of how they do a flood map, okay? Because most people think that somebody blindly closes their eyes and just kind of went like this across the map. They actually, it's a pretty sophisticated process. The military for the United States has several pieces of software that they use to get our flood maps. The first one is something called LIDAR. It sounds a lot like radar because that's pretty much what it is. They fly an aircraft over the top of the county, back and forth, and they shoot a radar beam that gives them a three-dimensional look at the ground underneath them. They use it for war. So if I am going to fight in the mountains or a valley or whatever, they fly an aircraft so they can see where is it I want to keep my troops to keep out of lines of fire and etc. It gives us a great 3D dimension of what the ground looks like underneath us. Then they also have a piece of software that allows them to rain on a computer model into that LIDAR so that they can see where the water goes. Because if I'm going to camp out or put my troops somewhere, I don't want them caught in a flash flood. So it's great for us because what they do is they take a three-dimensional picture of the ground underneath us, and then they take a water model and they say, right in the middle of Beaumont, I need you to drop 12 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And they can do so. And so they see where the water goes in the topography of the ground, and then they stop it. And then when they stand it up, they overlay Google Maps. They don't, but something like that. And that's how we get this crazy looking line that goes across all these neighborhoods. It's because of the topography that they've lifted the water into, and all of a sudden they stop it, and then they draw the line, see the water went right there. Oh, well, that's half of this whole neighborhood. A zone on one side, BC or X on the other, because the water didn't go over there. Now, it is very sophisticated. Here's the problem. Mother Nature says, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm going to put 62 inches of rain in here from Hurricane Harvey, and so all bets are off on the map. Because then people say, I got wet. I was in a 100-year floodplain. Yeah, well, it didn't rain 12 inches. It rained 60 inches. And the water is going to go everywhere at that point in time, or depending on where the water falls. So floodway, you're pretty much going to be inside the 100-year floodplain. Now, we got some quirks. You may be in a BC or X outside the 100-year floodplain in a designated floodway. But remember that it may be sloping, so they think the water is going to continue and not spread. Does that make sense? Okay.
So when they build these retention ponds and try to control the way that water flows against topography and all that.
So here's what I like in Houston. I went to talk to an agency, a group like you and Katie, and the young lady says, yeah, she said, they're all wanting to go out into some neighborhood that's being built because it has that big retention pond. Really? So what they're doing is they're flowing the water through the neighborhood to get it to the retention pond, right? I mean, that's what they're doing. I used to be in the development world. And so then you have to hold the water on the property and then it goes somewhere else, okay? So what they're doing is they're designing so that the whole subdivision, the water has to run through the subdivision to get down to the retention pond instead of leaving the subdivision. So in my world, you're attracting the water to your neighborhood to keep it inside the retention pond, but that's what they have to do to get their drainage surveys done. So, and what's really crazy is we sell the lots for more on the lake view of a retention pond. And we don't want to buy flood insurance. But anyway, I digress. Any other questions? Bored you to tears?
No,
it was very
really
good.
good.
Okay. Anything else? Did you have questions I work for these two people, so get in touch with them, and they can email me or call me on things that they can't answer. They're both pretty sharp on the flood program. But I do it, unfortunately, some days, every day for them. Anything else I can cover for you while I'm here? Thank you, ladies, for
Thank
inviting me.
you. Thank you, Very good information.
Where do you live?
I live in Magnolia, over by Houston.
And this is your region where you work for, right?
I cover Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. So yesterday I was in Brownsville, today I'm here, tomorrow I'm in Houston, and Monday I'll be in Arkansas.
I knew that was, I knew, that's why I
I'm
asked.
called a regional sales manager, which sounds really important, but all I do is I take care of about 1,400 independent